Do you know someone who's struggling? Someone who continues to make the wrong decisions? Could that someone be you? Have you had a problem in the past of making decisions that afterwards you were just like, why did I do that? Have you ever wanted to get help and didn't really know how? Have you ever wanted to help someone in that situation and really not understood how to do it? Did you ever ask yourself, why do I keep making these decisions? Or why do they keep making those decisions? We're going to take some time to explore and see this world through eyes we've never looked through and shoes we've never walked in. These are the sons and daughters made in His image with a potential to positively impact our community. This is raw, this is real, and this is Ransom.
With every star, we are born again. Open your heart, spend less time in your head.
This show is brought to you by Ransom Recycling, your number one choice for electronic recycling in Mobile, Alabama. Help reduce waste in our landfills by recycling all of your unwanted, unused, and non-working electronics. Ransom Recycling is a division of Ransom Ministries that is helping to put men and women back to work. Check out ransomministries.com for a complete list of acceptable items. Drop-offs and pickups can be easily scheduled through the website. Please note that we are not accepting TVs at this time. Ransom Recycling, open 8 to 3 Monday through Friday. Help our planet while helping men and women re-enter the workforce.
With every star, we are born again. Open your heart, spend less time in your head.
Welcome to the Ransom Experience. This is Anna Lee with Ransom Ministries, and I'm here with my good friend Julie. And today we are going to be talking a little bit about her life. She's very inspiring to me in so many ways, and I know she's going to be for you also. So I'm excited for you to meet her. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so Julie, starting out, let's get a little background on you. What would you say that your life was like as a child?
It was adventurous. I would say that I traveled around a lot more as a child. I had a father that was in a band, so I was on a lot of band gigs with him and just kind of experienced some unique things as a child. So,
do you think that growing up that you had, tell me about like your family dynamic. Was it a really good, healthy dynamic?
It was to an extent. I feel like it was a little abnormal. Like I said, my dad was in a band, so that kind of kept him on the road. And then my mom was she was sick a lot. So I spent a lot of time with my father, and grandparents, aunts and uncles. We had big family gatherings. So I feel like that's in the normal category.
Yes, it absolutely is. We talk a lot about childhood and how it shapes us on this podcast, just looking back over the course of our lives, because we all carry kind of trauma and difficulty from that time. It's very rare for you to come out of childhood with absolutely no,
That's very true.
issues at all or anything that you would change. But tell me a little bit about your childhood as in your teenage years.
I spent a lot of time actually in and out of psychiatric hospitals. I had self-harm issues, struggled in school, experience with drugs. I was a very very rebellious kid.
In your teenage years?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of our listeners can relate to, going through those teenage years and things starting to the world opens up to you.
Yeah.
Is really what ends up happening. And if you're not, a lot can affect that. Even somebody who's in the most stable, healthy home, like you were talking about with, your dad or with having a big family, the world opens up to you and it's like you just have so many options and so many ways that you can go, and it can be very, very confusing and difficult in those years. So would you say that that's kind of when your journey started as far as
as far as drugs and alcohol went, it started probably around 10 or 11.
Wow.
my dad being in the band, I mean, he used a lot of alcohol. So alcohol was always around, so it was socially acceptable. I thought it was fine. You know, it was the thing to do. Even at our family gatherings, you know, everybody was drinking and having a good time. So that's how I felt that I needed to fit in, or I needed to
Yeah,
socialize with them.
absolutely. That was your way. That was a way to connect,
Yeah, absolutely.
which is interesting. I think that in the world of addiction, so much comes from lack of connection. Would you agree with that? Like,
Yes.
it begins because, at least in my experience, connection is so important, and there's not much I wouldn't do to get it, know?
Right.
And so I think that that's one of the areas where we really lack. Like, you're going to have a really hard time living a sober life and a full life with no connection.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I've learned that that's one of the biggest tools that I've found, because I was so awkward with people, and I didn't know how to connect with people. That was foreign to me. So even now, I'm still learning how to connect and have those conversations and have those healthy relationships.
It's amazing for me for you to say that, because I've never seen that from you once. Like, you have so exponentially grown.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're awkward at all. You are always so welcoming and kind and open and engaging and fun. And so I always felt like that growing up, that I was extremely awkward, and I had to learn it was almost like learning how to connect.
Yes.
Because otherwise I was going to connect in different ways that were unhealthy.
Right.
Learning how to try to connect with people is so important. So as you're looking back, I guess we could fast forward a little bit to kind of the beginning stages of your coming out of addiction and your journey to sobriety. Was there anything during that time that really was almost like, all right, I'm at the end of my rope, this is it, and this is going to be a turning point for me? Or how many years were you in addiction, I guess, first of all?
Well, I'm 30. I'm 35. So a good 20 years of my life.
Wow.
On and off. And as far as like a turning point, I almost, like, I've thought about this a lot, is there's so many different sequences within my life that I would say was some kind of turning point in my life. But the biggest one, and the one that really turned me over and changed kind of how I saw things, was that I no longer had to please anybody else. There's nobody else I had to impress. There's nobody that I needed to please. It was God. That's all I needed to follow. All I needed to make sure I was doing was the next right thing that He wanted me to do. And in order to do that, it caught my interest of starting to want to find out more of what He wanted. So that was my biggest turning point.
That's incredible. So really, it sounds like there was a reordering, tell me if this is right,
Yeah.
of your priorities and your affections, really.
Absolutely.
Because initially, would you say that your affections were kind of, well, I guess that for most of us, they are on others. Wanting to be, we talked about that connection issue, that's for most people everywhere, that you want to connect, you do anything to connect, and that almost becomes your driving force. So what you're saying is, really, there was a point that came where you almost felt like that's futile. Like, I'm never going to get that.
Right.
Which is where I've been. So many, you get to this point where you're like, I am not able to please anyone really fully. I can't do it.
Yeah.
And you that's when you kind of open up, the light cracks in and into your life and explodes everything, and you can start to see, who am I? Who did He make me to be?
Right.
So so you kind of hit this point where, tell me about who in your life, I'd be so interested to know, was around you that was really kind of introducing you to Christ. Like,
the first person, and I mean, we'd have to go back to, I was probably 18 or 19. I had been up all night. I was at somebody's house I didn't know, and I was walking down the side of the road. looking for my next hit, basically. And I had a lady pull over on the side of the road and asked me if I needed a ride, and I told her no. And she said, well, I really don't mind. You know, she looked real sweet. I knew she wasn't going to take me where I needed to go, so that's why I turned that ride down. But she insisted. She's like, just get in. And I was like, okay. So I got in the car with her. She's like, well, I need to stop at the store real quick. And it was her own personal store. And we walked in there, and she's like, I have to go to church real quick. I was like, okay. And she's like, here's a toothbrush. Just brush your teeth up real quick. Don't worry about anything else. And I mean, I looked awful. I know I did. And I walked into church because I had no other option. It was like an intriguing, repulsive feeling.
Yeah.
And I walked in the church, and I actually got presented Christ in a different way than I was used to. I grew up Catholic, so it was a little different for me. And that was a big
Turning point.
as
Wow.
far as even knowing there was a God. Or
That's amazing. You think about the reality of that if she had not pulled over and brought you. I mean, that sounds like the most bizarre,
Oh, it
once
was.
in a million kind of, scenario. But
Yeah.
what really stuck out to me was the phrase that you used, that stepping into the church was almost an intriguing, repulsive feeling,
yeah.
which is so relatable. I mean, how many of us, I'm going to just use myself, not say us, go to church on Sunday and feel intrigued but repulsed? Like, I'm just going to be honest. I grew up in the church my whole life, and I struggle to love the church.
Yeah.
I really struggle to love the church, because how much hurt goes on within the church, how much hypocrisy, how much, and within myself, hypocrisy within myself.
Yeah.
But you step in those doors, and there's this feeling of that I don't want to be here sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah.
Or before you even get up and get to church. But there's this drawing that you know that this is where believers are gathering. Mm-hmm. But it's almost like it burns sometimes,
It does. It does.
It's
It
like
does.
it's changing me, and it's painful, and it reminds me of how we say we want connection so bad, but do we really want what it looks like? Or do we want it like safe on our terms?
Right.
Because a connection is accountability, and
It
it's
is.
knowing
Yeah.
someone fully, which is not always pretty.
It is not. It can get very ugly.
So what you were talking about, I mean, you were saying that you felt like you looked awful. You were off the street, and this woman brings you into that.
Yeah.
And so that is such a profound, number one, it's a profound story. And it should be an encouragement to so many believers who are trying to figure out where they fit in with talking to people about the Lord. Just find who's on your way.
Yeah.
She was driving. Like, that's something that I was always taught growing up, is Jesus was walking, he was on his way, and he would talk to the people around him.
Right.
And that's what that woman did. And so that's such an inspiration. What are this is going to be kind of a difficult, touchy question. What are some of the consequences you feel still out of that struggle? Because coming out of it, like, you're not marked by your past, but so many of the choices I've made, I still have consequences for
Right.
today, are still carrying.
It definitely is. I don't have a lot, which it doesn't really bother me, but I mean, in reality, I've thrown a lot away in the years. I've hurt a lot of people, and I've lost some trust. But that, I mean, even that now, I feel like is slowly being restored. I'm having to grow up later in life. I think that is my biggest thing.
Wow, that is profound. So that's something that's not unique to addiction, is it? I mean,
I don't think so.
I think that as far as, like, I have a very close family member who went through something very traumatic at an extremely early age. And it's almost like emotionally, they've never worked through it. They've never looked at it. They've never processed it. It's almost like emotionally they're still that age,
Yeah.
Now they're older and way on in life, but they're still at that age. And if we don't process what's happening, which is what addiction does so much, is it numbs us for however many years we're in it.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to ever grow up or mature out of that. And it's one of the things that I always talk about in class is that give yourself some grace if you're coming out of like a 10, 20-year addiction.
Yeah.
Because you've been on pause, you know, in so many ways. And so it's something that it's super discouraging for anybody who's coming out of addiction because you look around and everybody's further on in life, honestly. And it's something that, you know, I've seen and will say it until I die that, you know, addiction doesn't make, you're not a more valuable employee, a more incredible person in spite of your addiction. Mm-hmm. It's because of it.
Right.
Because of what it puts you through, you know? When you go through that and then you come out of it, like the woman I'm looking at across from me today, I know you can't see her. She is beautiful and strong and so intelligent and just has all these strengths that I look up to every single day that I know she wouldn't have had she not walked through what she has. We were just talking before we got on, catching up about how that's what God uses. God uses things, and you can attest to this, jump in with me, that you would never think he could to bring about good that you never would have imagined.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as you were saying, you know, like when you come out of it, and I never really thought about that till you actually just said that now. I mean, as you go through addiction and come out of it, it does when you're going up that upward climb. I mean, it's so much insight, it takes so much strength, and it takes so much just pouring out of yourself, just getting all these things that you had held on to and learned and used, all these habits you're having to let go of, and it's relearning life again.
Yeah, it is relearning life
and
again.
it's having to trust fully in God on that, because I feel like it'd be hard for anybody just to, you know, relearn life again. And
yeah, it would. And really you're testing so much, like you're physically testing your body to the limit. You are emotionally testing your body to the limit. I mean, I don't think that we can grasp, if you've never walked in addiction for any extended period of time, how much is tested. It's almost like that race that I was talking to a friend about the other day that they do out in Texas somewhere. It's called Hotter Than Hell or something like that. Huh. They push their bodies, these people do, they push their bodies to the fullest extent like imaginable. You know, they're going 100 miles in the hottest week of the year in the hottest area in the United States with like a bottle of water. Right. And it's amazing. It sounds so ridiculous, but what happens is mentally they've trained themselves. Anybody could train their body to do that, but mentally. Yeah. And that's what you're talking about. You did, like, you're on that race right now. Yeah. Yeah. You know, I would be curious to ask you, for someone who has never gone through what we're talking about right now, for someone who maybe is on the outside, they have a loved one who's struggling with addiction, who's in it, what would you say to them? Like, how would you describe what active addiction is like? And what would you tell them as advice for how to help someone?
I'm hoping I'm answering this correctly. Okay, so
whatever you say will be perfect.
Okay. Someone in active addiction, I feel like the best way for me to, the kind of the visual that I see is someone who has all these walls around them and can't see. They're very blinded and consumed by that addiction and their self. And as far as how someone can be supportive of somebody like that, just loving them unconditionally, and using wisdom in the same sense with it, but not giving up on them. Continuing to plant those seeds, even if you don't see them growing.
Yeah. That's very profound. Like the analogy of that being in a room, like you can't see. Yeah. And you're consumed with something and consumed with yourself. That's very deep. And I think so much of, because addiction is not just drugs or alcohol, is it? Addiction could be anything.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
if I decide to, for 8 hours a day, play video games or stare at my computer, I'm in addiction. Am I not?
Yeah,
I'm
you're consumed by that video game.
Exactly. I'm consumed by that. If I sat down and ate horribly, like just abused my body with what I ate all day, I'm consumed with that, right?
Yep.
It's a God of mine.
Right.
It is my God, because that's what I'm serving. You know, I'm submitting my health to that. I'm submitting my, that's more important than being around for my family. And so we put these things in boxes, especially in, I don't want to step on any toes right now, but maybe I do, in westernized church, especially in the South, that some addictions are worse than others when they are not, I mean, is that what you have
Mentally,
seen?
I think it causes the same damage.
I do too.
mean, I think as far as, if you look at it in the sense of one's worse than the other, I mean, the main thing would be how easily can that drug kill you? That would
Wow,
be the
that's a
level
great
of it.
point.
But addiction in itself, I mean, it all does the same thing to our brain.
Yep. Because taking horrible care of yourself can kill yourself just as fast as being a heroin addict, right? It's true. And it's nobody wants to think about that, because these are our pet sins that we're okay with, right? Like that one is the one, well, when I come home from work and I, need to veg out and not talk to my spouse and, watch TV for 8 hours, binge watch for 8 hours, that's not really addiction. That's just how I cope.
Right.
Well, addiction is how you cope. It's a coping mechanism. It has been for so many. Like, at least, have you seen that? Like, it was a way that you coped.
Yes. I mean, it was a way, it was a way that I coped, in a way that I lived. It was the only way I was able to live. I mean, and one thing that I've mentioned several times is the hardest, I don't know why this is like I'm going in another,
No, please
go
do.
another
Go
lane.
ahead.
Okay. Like as far as like work went, and having a job, the hardest thing getting sober was having to work sober, because work was even a trigger. Like
Really?
it was like I had to achieve a certain momentum and had to do this top notch job that I thought I was doing in my addiction, but I was just I felt like I was a slug. I was dragging at work sober. And it was hard. It was that was a hard thing to get through, but it was also a big stumbling block I was able to overcome.
That's huge. Because it is hard. It's you're relearning life, but then you're relearning work. So I would love for our listeners to imagine for a minute if just the difficulty of not having that one thing that helps you propel yourself to work in the morning, like coffee or something like that. The small difficulty that poses, where you feel like, dang, I'm just off all day. But imagine that, because addiction, substance abuse makes you totally different in your personality, your character, and you become dependent on that because of it's who you are. It becomes a part of who you were at that point.
Yeah.
And so coming out of that and remaking your whole identity is extremely exhausting and difficult. And so it's something that takes an enormous amount of strength and character and perseverance, something I definitely see in you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Well, Julie, do you have anything else you want to add?
I can't think of anything. No.
All right.
No.
Well, listen, I really appreciate having you here today. Thank you so much for your vulnerability and your honesty. I know that this is difficult. It's difficult for anyone to do, but it is such a blessing to so many people. You have no idea how many lives that you're blessing, lives that you're saving by doing this. So we just really appreciate and sure love you.
Well, thank you for having me on here too.
If you'd like to hear more about Julie's story or connect with her or hear more about what we do at Ransom Ministries, go over to our website at www.ransomministries.com and you can learn all about us. Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Julie and that you'll remember to tune in next Wednesday when we'll hear from one of our longtime volunteers, Mr. Bill Robinson, on how an illness brought him to the realization of what's really important in life. Remember to follow us, hit subscribe, and share with all your friends.
Too many days in the darkness without a glimpse of the light. Running tired and broken and scared, but I swear I'll never give up the fight. With